This is the final word story time, number 227. Jeff Lemon, Adam Collins back on deck. The power is on this week. It knocked me off story time last week, but I've got some ball terrors for you today. Stories I've been working on the last few days. I don't know what Adam has. That's the joy and the surprise of the show. 227. That's what Kevin Peterson made at Adelaide in 2010. Vinod Campbell made it in one of his early run with all the doubles when he was going to be the next big thing, and it didn't quite happen. And our favourite Dickless wonder, Wally Hammond, after it fell off and got put back on, made 227 in New Zealand when he was toweling them up for fun in 1992.
He did indeed. And he's also cap number 227, which so it's Wally Hammond squared. So buy our Wally Hammond T-shirt. You can learn about Wally Hammond nearly losing his cock. And, we spoke about that briefly, Brinks and I, about why he didn't play in 26, which is a real omission when you consider what a great, unbelievable list of names that it's kind of missing Hammond. But he was unable
in
to
strife
feature
in the draws.
In that series. So 227. We had Peterson 2010. I was there, unsurprisingly, given it was an Ashes series and it was in Adelaide, which
Adelaide.
I went to all of that and watched.
You do like
Peterson.
a trip to Adelaide.
I do. I always have, always will. I saw him bully our friend Xavier Doherty, who was playing his second test match, wasn't he?
Yes.
Played at Brisbane, played at Adelaide. Got a Guernsey again in India a couple of years on from that. But, yes, it was Peterson at his most belligerent. Very similar. Well, I was going to say similar to how he played there in 2006. It actually wasn't. In 2010, he was more bullying the Australians, whereas in 2006, it was a masterpiece. It was an unbelievably well put together innings. So all is that. I realised, Jeff, by the way, I neglected to mention. I was half mentioned it on the weekly show. I had an interesting game last week playing for MCC up at a school in Nottingham, which I've already forgotten the name of. Ratcliffe College.
Were you taking down were you Pranav Dhanavade? Were you taking down a bunch of 11-year-olds?
No, not quite. They were six formers, which I guess in year 12s or whatever. But I did finish. I had a good game, made some runs at a kind of important time when we lost wickets after lunch. But what really happened was before tea, I managed to get one straight away. My mate, Roger Bolstridge, who's now played 374 games for the club, which is a staggering achievement.
That's what Elijah wouldn't have made.
Yeah, there you go. He took a snaffle off me at slip for the second time in 2 weeks, which was an absolute blinder, which got me going. But I ended up with the figures of 7.5 overs, 5 maidens, 5 for 5. So on the scorecard, it reads 5, 5, 5, 5. So that in order to get that, you can only, I guess you can do it with 6.5, 7.5, 8.5, 9.5, 10.5, enough scoring shots, and 10.5, but you couldn't have 11.5 overs, I don't think. Anyway, so it's an unusual sequence of numbers on a card, which I thought you'd appreciate.
I do appreciate that. There's an entire a long story time answer about 5 by 5, as in the pipe, 5 by 5. The line from the start of Aliens, the second Alien movie, when the dropship goes down. One of our numbers was 555. And it's one of the few completely non-cricket related answers. We've had a few that are pretty spurious, but there have been a handful where cricket is not related at all, and that was one because I had free reign to do what I wanted. You can go and find that one. I don't know what the episode's called. It was probably 3 years ago, but you can work it out.
And the reason I said that, I got that ball in my hand because, you keep the ball when you take a 5, don't you? So I put that on the shelf. And 2 balls. I had 2 balls in my hand, not because it's some Hitler joke, having one of them. It's not a VE Day gag, although it is VE Day 2 days from now, the 80th anniversary of that moment in time. It's because the chap who took 5 for Glamorgan yesterday, Kellaway. I say yesterday when we're recording it, but it was a few days on from when you'll be hearing this. He took some with his left arm and some with his right.
There you go. Change it up. The stranger. L'étranger.
Sit on the hand. Have a trundle.
Keep things fresh. It's always weird.
Ben Callaway sits on his hand.
You heard it first on the final word. Have you ever broken an arm or like done your right arm badly enough that you have to handshake with your left hand?
I think I was something else there. No, I have not. I've not had I've never had a plaster cast on. I've
really
hurt
weird
fingers, but never heard it. Never done
but not badly enough that you couldn't shake hands.
No, never been in that boat.
Because it's always like when I've broken a bunch of different boats. When you do that, you've got to remember, and then you've got to remind other people. Like, so when you meet someone, you've got to get in first and say, "I can't shake your hand," because otherwise you just go to do it, and then it hurts a lot if you've got broken fingers or thumbs or whatever it is. But trying to handshake with your left hand is really weird. It's interesting how you train certain skills. If you train a new skill with both hands, like when I worked at the casino, they had to teach us. You've got to learn how to pick up chips really quickly on the table and like stack them up, and then you've got to be able to maneuver them and like split the stacks. You've got to be able to pick up 20 and know exactly what 20 is by the feel of it. You got to cut them into 5s and 4s and 3s and all that kind of stuff. And you learn both hands at once. So there's no one hand's better than the other. Your left's as good as your right, but only for that new skill because you haven't learned that skill yet. Whereas if it's anything that's familiar, then it feels completely awkward and weird.
I'm still trying to work out what Winnie's dominant hand will be for cricket purposes. She starts All Stars on Sunday, actually, this weekend. This episode will be going live, which is kind of a bit of a thrill for me. That's her first organised cricket. She's got a name on her blue shirt that the ECB send them, and the plastic bat and the ball and the backpack. It's all very cute, and a few of her schoolmates are going along with her. I'm sure I'll end up coaching it or something. Like the idea of she doesn't really know whether she's right-handed or left-handed yet. So I throw the ball to her, and she's basically working it out as she goes. Which,
if you can train ambidexterousness, what an advantage that would be.
That's true.
I think it's good for critical thinking. It's good for like left and right brain stuff. It's good. There's got to be there has to be an advantage to being able to be versatile neurologically.
I prefer if she just learned Mandarin personally, but next best thing will be batting right-handed and left-handed to aid that brain development. Oh, one more thing in intro. I mentioned that game I played last week. There was a nice final word connection. James Hawley, who was my captain that day and a very accomplished player in Nottinghamshire, he was the pro at Hampton and won a flag in the first team with Glenn Finkeld, who's one of our Nerd Pledge sleuths and a good friend of Glenn's. So nice to have that link back through the podcast with someone who is a very good cricketer up in that part of the world and did a great job managing the match. So nice that, and Glenn was thrilled when I told him that. He's like, oh, we played heaps together. You know what Glenn's like with how enthusiastic he is about his club at Hampton, where he was recently made a life member, where you've done the presentation night for them, and I played a game for them a couple of seasons ago, and they've got a beautiful uniform and a club with a lot of success, great junior program and all the rest of it. So in no small part due to our great mate Glenn, who we'll see in England playing with us later in the year. He's playing in our Wormsley game. May as well plug that while we're here. 18th of August, Lord's Taverners fundraiser. We've got Wormsley for fuck all. So we need you to buy tickets.
We have a replica of Lords. We've got
the Oval technically, but we've got the replica of the ground there with the
test ground.
Yeah, the test ground. So it's 20 quid to get
the
in.
Replica of Lords. Someone built one, didn't they, with the slope? There's a ground that measured the exact slope.
Oh, is there? I didn't know that. Well, I know that Hampstead's got a very similar gradient when you play at Limington Road there. But no, we've got 18th of August. Take the day off work. It's a Monday. Final word 11 versus the Zero Ducks. Given 11, we'll do more work on assembling the team soon. But I can say with some certainty that Glenn Finkeld will appear in that team because he's flying out literally for it. So that'll be fun when we do that and we get our team together. They've recruited well, Toby and Norcross. They're already quite busy on this front. They've been very busy. So the onus is on us to get some pros and to get our shit together. But it's going to be a terrific celebration for not only what we do, but of course the Tabs as well. We've got the half marathon coming up. Donate accordingly. But then in August, we'll have some fun on the grassy banks of Wormsley.
Very good. Let us get into what we have to do. Let's play a game. It's called Nerd Pledge. Nerd Pledge. It's a game that we play with nice people on the internet who fund this program. It would not happen without the game of Nerd Pledge. Here is what people do. They decide to voluntarily subscribe. You don't have to, but they decide to send in some hard-earned. And the amount that they send in, the configuration, it's not a normal one that you'd pull out of your wallet. It's a special one. It's tailored because it relates to cricket in some way, and we have to figure out what the relationship is. Kate Cook, new pledger, welcome to the show. Kate, £7.22, lovely pledge, and it comes with a clue, Adam.
It does. My pledge, Kate says, relates to one of the worst days of my cricketing spectating experience at a beautiful ground famous for a tree that it's no longer got. Okay, I think I know where this might be going. My first time watching this type of cricket at home. What a terrible day to pick. Home's got talking marks there, so it's an adopted home perhaps. But probably a happier day for you two. Okay, not obscure, but always worth some extra discussion and perhaps a reminder from my side that we've been in dire places before and come back. Well, my first time down at Canterbury was during the 2005 Ashes when Australia lost to Bangladesh at Cardiff. Their next game against Bangladesh was at Kent. So I got on the train first thing in the morning, went down there and absolutely loved it and still do. Beautiful with all of those little small stands there. It's not like one dominant stand. There's the Woolly stand, the Cowdrey stand, the Underwood stand, and you can kind of get a feel for it from different perspectives. And of course, Jeff, you and I have covered quite a bit of cricket down there. So I'm looking forward to what you have to say about the ground that no longer has the tree.
Well, Cowdrey is going to come up later, not in this answer, and Underwood as well in passing. But the St Lawrence ground at Kent, it's now called is it still the Spitfire ground? Maybe.
I'm pretty sure it is. It's a beer because the Spitfires weren't they made in? I'm pretty sure they're made in Kent, weren't they? The Spitfires going back to their
Couldn't tell you.
There was definitely a big street party celebration in Kent yesterday. They encouraged some street parties on the first on the bank holiday Monday. I stand to be corrected, but I've got a feeling that the Spitfire manufacturer relates to Kent somehow, which is why there's a beer like an old sort of pump ale style beer that gets sold in lots of pubs in Kent, and thus why it's the sponsor of the county ground.
I see. All of the anniversaries. It was Hitler's death anniversary. That was recently. That was a good one. 80 years, I think. But,
well, they're all 80 because we're at the end of the, because D-Day's 80 years was last June, and then we come into, as I said before, Hitler in the bunker. Yeah. And before he emigrated to Argentina. No, he didn't really do that. I don't like those conspiracy theories. No. Didn't the Russians eventually prove beyond any doubt that they found some of his DNA at the site many years on from?
Well, I think so. I mean, the body was set on fire, but it doesn't mean it was totally destroyed. The birthdays around then. I saw somebody suggesting that I think it's April 28th. That Elon Musk should have it changed to April the 20th, so that he only has to organise one party for that day. It might be more convenient. Right, the Spitfires. That's where we've started. We started with the tree. So, Kate, I'm going to admit something at the start. I got kind of distracted by the tree more than the answer itself, because the ground was famous because there was a tree on the ground, and you may remember this. You may have heard of it. They had to come up with special laws for the tree that if you hit the tree, it was 4, and you couldn't get out, caught off the tree, and so on. Now, when the ground first started being used, when they'd first built it, it had the tree there. I don't know why they didn't take the tree out then. Presumably there were other trees that they did take out. They didn't take out this tree. Did people just not show up on the last day? Did they do 90% of the work and decide not to finish it? Lazy, I feel. Didn't want it enough. Anyway, the tree remained. The tree was massive. The tree had laws written for it. The tree died eventually. It got a fungal infection. Who among us hasn't, while staying at a backpackers in Buenos Aires or something like that? It had a fungal infection. It didn't. It lasted some years more, and then eventually came down in a storm in 2005. That was the end of the tree.
Oh, right. So I wonder. I remember feeling like the tree was there when I was there, but
so what happened is
when was it in 05?
They grew a sapling. I don't know if it was half. It might have been there when you were there, and then came down later.
Right.
They grew a graft, a sapling from it, which they initially intended to use to replace the tree, and then eventually thought better of it, because why would you deliberately plant a tree on the field just because there had previously been a tree on the field? That is not a smart idea. You know, there's a thing with traditions where traditions take root, and then people are like, well, we have to keep doing it. But if it's a dumb idea to begin with, don't continue. Like, what's your liability issues when some fielder runs into the tree trying to take a catch and injures themselves is not worth, it was a quirky piece of history that there was a tree here. There was, now there's not. Don't put another one there.
I feel like I play a lot of games with trees on the field over here. It's not an unusual thing to rock up and there to be a tree somewhere.
Unusual thing in pro cricket, though.
No, sure. But I mean, like, I've never seen it in Australia, I guess is my point.
No.
It's a thing here where if you've got a tree on the ground, you play to it, you lean into it. Indeed, there was a tree on the ground we played at in Barcelona the other week in that ODB trip where it was a rough ground with like rocks everywhere. It was messy, facility. But there were 2 trees on that ground.
Okay.
So we had to agree before play started and there was a tree overhanging where we were playing at London Fields at the near the Lido there a few weeks ago, where the tree overhangs by so far that we needed to have provision for if it hits the tree, it's 4. Like again, no deflection.
Yeah.
Because the branches overhanging by too far.
I like quirkiness. I appreciate that things are not all the same. I'm generally in favour of that, but I also think you don't need to be trapped by the past to say that because there was a tree, there should always be. So I think they made a sensible decision that let's plant the next tree outside the field of play and do it that way. So this story is very confusing. It confused me for a long time because the tree is called the St. Lawrence lime, but there are no limes on the tree. I am au fait with citrus fruit. It is not only my name, but my family grows a bunch of citrus of various types, and I understand a little bit about citrus and how they work. And I know that you don't get many 30-meter citrus trees. You know, I know that there were no limes falling off that tree when we have been there. When you're there watching cricket or you're seeing photos of it, it's not covered in fruit. There's no fruit because it's just English people being difficult. So this tree belongs to a genus called Tilia, which is commonly called the linden tree or the basswood. And for whatever reason, people in England said, we're going to also call these lime trees, although we will also have lime trees which will have limes on them. We will have this lime tree that does not have limes on them, that's a big, broad, tall tree without fruit. Why? I don't know. English is a stupid language in many, many ways. That's why. No fruit, but they have a lot of sap, this linden tree. They create lots of sap. And this, while researching this answer, is where I found out, Adam, that ants are good at farming. Many kinds of ants know how to farm, and these ants that live in linden trees are aphid farmers. They farm aphids. So you're familiar with the aphid? You've spent any time in the garden?
I am. I mean, not. I mean, I do. No, you know what? For the purpose of this conversation, I do not.
Okay. Well, you know, people always talk about them on rose bushes. The aphids, the little tiny bugs that get on the rose petals and eat the rose bush, and people get upset.
Okay.
They're tiny.
I've got a rose tree in my garden as well that might, maybe they're eating my roses right now.
You probably have aphids on it. And it's one of the things that people love about ladybugs is that they eat aphids. So I've always found it interesting that that people experience insects in a very different way. There are degrees of discrimination. You know, there are insects that make us angry and hostile, and then everyone loves ladybugs. People are like, ew, gross, beetles. And then they go, oh, ladybug, that's cute. Let's dress our toddlers up like them. Let's put ladybug costumes on our small dogs. You know, let's have them for Halloween. Let's put them on our backpacks and lunchboxes. Why does everybody love ladybugs? Just because they've got spots. All the other beetles don't have spots and people go gross and they squash them. Ladybugs, fine, because they're wearing a shiny jacket. What's the go?
Might have been why they got rid of Pete Best. Maybe he had spots. I don't know.
Maybe. Helen did.
I've learnt about a type of bug in your country, actually, in Portugal, which it's one of the oldest libraries in the world. And there is a bug. I learnt this in a book that Winnie reads, I add. So, it feels like a reasonably factual one that I read. Sure. Where it's a type of insect which eats the other insects which try and eat the books. So its mission in life is to protect books.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's a bookworm.
Yeah, I guess it must eat the bookworms.
It's anti-bookworm.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, this is protection. This is kind of where the ants come into things, right? So aphids can eat sap. And so what they do, they can like stab through the skin of a tree or a plant and extract the sap, and they can digest it and they can process it. And also aphids get eaten by a lot of other stuff while they're digesting sap. And so what they can do is render the sap digestible for other insects. They have the bit of a plant where the sap circulates around, sort of like a vascular system, is called the phloem. And here is a sentence that I did not expect to read and that I would now like to read to you. When their mouth part penetrates the phloem, the sugary high-pressure liquid is forced out of the anus of the insects. And at that point, the ants eat it. So this is amazing work. So basically the aphid plugs in.
There's the old episode title looked after.
Yeah. We had the one about crickets, how crickets breed as well, that confused a lot of people, I think. Grasshoppers, maybe. This isn't a sexual or reproductive thing, but the aphids get sap hosed through their bodies so hard that like liquid butt sugar comes pouring out of their anuses. And then the ants are like, I'm going to eat the sugar out of your anus. And then that's what they do. So the ants eat out the aphids, their aphid friends. And the ants also encourage this when they see an aphid that they think might be full of sugary goo. They come up and stroke it. They massage it with their antennae. And then the aphid responds by having a gushing gout of arse goo comes spewing out, and then the ant sucks it all up. So it's quite a visceral experience that these two insects have got going on here.
More than what some of the desperados get at spearmint and rhino, which I'm sure give it a red hot go.
Absolutely. But it's an intimate relationship. But then it goes beyond that. They almost become friends because sometimes, like when it's cold or if there's danger around, the ants will carry the aphids into the ant nest and keep them safe, and then bring them out again and put them back on the tree when it's time to start sucking up their butt juice again. and they carry them around the tree and put them on like the most luscious, sappy parts of the tree. So the ants can't eat sap, but the ants can eat the butt juice that comes from the sap. And this is how it happens. And then famously, people notice this when they park cars under linden trees, is their cars get covered in a kind of sticky syrup. That's all of the anus juice from the aphids that's coating your car. Your car is covered in aphid anus juice, and it's delicious and sticky, and ants want to eat it. So
your car is covered in anus juice.
Yes.
Quote, end quote, Jeff Lemon.
Quote, end quote. And you can probably like run your finger along it and lick your finger and it probably tastes good. I
mean, you could.
Haven't eaten out an aphid myself, but it's on the list. So anyway, what the ants do is they protect the aphids from other predators. So they become like an aphid protection racket. You know, they're like, nice tree you got here. It'd be an awful shame if somebody came along and ate you while you were feeding off it. So they keep other insects away that are going to eat the aphids. And that is what was going on in the St. Lawrence lime tree when it came down in the thunderstorm. All of the ants and the aphids had to go somewhere else. Right. That was a side mission. Big tree. This is what we're getting back to. When you have a real big tree at a cricket ground, obviously people want to hit a six over it or know who did hit a six over it. Not many players did. Very short list. Carl Hooper did it because played a lot down there, so why wouldn't he have? Leary Constantine, the Baron, did it. A fellow named Arthur Watson did it, who we don't know about, but he did it facing Titch Freeman, who we do know about in 1925. So Arthur Watson hit Titch over the tree. They're the only three who are guaranteed confirmed. There's another one I'll come to in a minute. But we were speaking of nicknames and how players get a nickname officially on their profile page. On Cricket Archive.
Talk about butt juice, or that's not going to be the...
No.
Okay.
But Butt Juice, the sequel. No, I don't think there has been any cricketer named that, at least not on the official, in the Association of Cricket Statisticians pages. But in the ACS pages on Cricket Archive, our gentleman friend Arthur Watson, who hit the ball over the tree, is known as Jacko. He's Jacko Watson on his official profile page. And he was also a military man. He joined up in 1901. He fought in the Boer War, and then he fought in World War I. He ended up as a colonel. And Jacko took place in the attack at Hooge in 1917, which was the last ever cavalry charge by British troops on horseback when they were charging a bunch of Turkish and German guns. So they're pursuing the Turks from Gaza towards Jerusalem, sign of the times, and they're being blocked by a force of artillery and machine guns. There are an estimated couple of thousand infantry in support and 170 riders on horseback from the Worcestershire and the Warwickshire yeomanry go, fuck it, let's charge them. And they put the whole enterprise to flight. So they've got three groups. They've got two on the flanks to drive away the infantry, and the third group rides into the teeth of the guns at artillery and machine guns on horses with swords. And it kind of works and it kind of doesn't. There's a amazingly written quote from an officer who's in the charge who says, machine guns and rifles opened up on us the moment we topped the rise behind which we had formed up. I remember thinking that the sound of crackling bullets was just like a hailstorm on an iron-roofed building. A whole heap of men and horses went down 20 or 30 yards from the muzzles of the guns. The squadron broke into a few scattered horsemen and seemed to melt away completely. For a time, I, at any rate, had the impression that I was the only man left alive. I was amazed to discover that we were the victors. So a bunch of men fall on that frontal charge, but enough of them do survive to put the gunners to flight, and then they're able to claim this victory in this remarkable last military action on horseback. Jacko wins a DSO, a Distinguished Service Order, for his bravery in that charge. And then somehow in between his military service, he still manages to play 100-plus first-class matches. And there's an innings where he takes on Ted McDonald, who's the famous Australian fast bowler of the era, one of the early really, really quick bowlers, who was intimidating, but I guess in the circumstances of the cavalry charge, Ted McDonald probably wasn't that scary for Jacko, who was playing against Lancashire, where Ted McDonald was playing. There's a quote from Neville Cardis in The Guardian about Jacko. He says, in less than half an hour, this very fierce gentleman hit 50 runs. It was the most peppery bit of batting I have seen for many a day. So, 50 in 30 minutes, not going too badly against one of the best quicks of the era. It's a pretty modest record, Jacko, all up. He made a few other 50s, but now not a great deal, but had his moments.
It's got to be one of the better ones, right? Jacko, Monkey, and others like, Jacko is if Mark Jackson had a quick info profile, if he was to say Jacko Jackson.
Sure.
I'm thinking of
But there's no Jack. He's got no Jack anywhere in his names, this fella.
Yeah.
Or Johns. Yeah. So I don't know where it comes from.
I'm thinking of Trent from Punch Bowl with Kev. Sicko. Kev is a sicko.
Sicko Watson.
Yeah.
Well, he wasn't sicko. He was Jacko, but he did hit one over the tree. Confirmed. The one that's not confirmed is a fella called Big Jim. Jim Smith. Real original with the naming there. Well done, Jim Smith. I think I went to school with a Jim Smith. Hope he's going well. Now, really original stuff from the parents of Jim Smith, and then Big Jim, extra original.
I went to school with Ben Smith, who nearly won the seat of Flinders the other night. In fact, he might still be in the count. He was the local independent trying to flip Flinders, which has always been a Liberal Party seat, with the exception of one term. I think Labor held it under Hawke, but it's been a Liberal seat ever after. But I doubt he's listening. He's the Victorian Father of the Year, which I didn't realise until he was running for Parliament as well. Obviously, achieved a lot since leaving Lindale in whatever year that was. So, well, there you go. Jim Smith. Tell me more.
Smith. Big Jim. He's 6'3". He's a fast bowler and he likes tonking it. At one stage, Adam, Big Jim Smith shares the record for the fastest half century in first class cricket when he makes 50 in the space of 15 minutes. And then not long after that, he decides to break his own record and scores a 50 in 11 minutes, which is still the record to this day. 11 minutes. It's the fastest legit 50. There's some dodgy declaration 50s.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through the dodgy declaration hundreds and before, and like I wish they didn't. I mean, well, people like Andrew Sampson are quite fierce about not counting them. But like the Tom Moody 25 ball 100 and stuff like that. There'll be 50s that are in that category for sure. Yeah.
But this one was legit, was a competitive game. He made it in 11 minutes. He was eventually out for 66 in 18 minutes, having hit 8 sixes.
Wow.
And Marty Williamson, who wrote a lot on Crick Info on history pieces, wrote a piece about him years ago saying that Big Jim knew his limitations, so he kept himself to one shot, which was to try to hit it over long on, no matter what happened. Martin says he hit a 6 through the committee room windows at Lord's, several into the top tier of the pavilion, and a number over the mound stand and into St John's Wood Road. So a bit like Travis Head did in that one day last year when Agnew said that's the biggest 6 he'd ever seen hit at Lord's. The Kent innings, he hit a bunch of 6s, but no, it's not confirmed as to whether any of them went over the tree. They could have done. He was probably capable, but it's not locked in. Anyway, none of this has anything to do with Kate's number, which I haven't yet got to. But she said it would have been a good day for us and not for her, which I assume means that Australia were playing England in a game there. And we don't care. if Australia win or not. I think we've made that fairly clear, but it would be reasonable to make that assumption. The number was £7.22. £7.22 is something that happened in a game that we were at, Adam, in 2019 when we started at a World Cup game in Manchester. We've told this story before, but the Australian men playing South Africa in Manchester the night before, we got on the road about midnight. We recorded the daily podcast in the car while driving to Canterbury. It was a 6-hour drive. We got there at 6 a.m., got to sleep for about 90 minutes in the Airbnb, and then went to the ground to watch Australia play England in the Women's Ashes third ODI, in which Elise Perry took 7 for 22.
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't have done a number of those things with the benefit of hindsight, but recording the pod whilst you were driving and I was holding both microphones was something that I wouldn't encourage of us again. It was of its time. We had no choice because we were commentating I was commentating the game during the World Cup, and I think it was more that we'd committed to being at the women's game, and we wanted to make a point of making it there. We didn't want to skip out on a women's Ashes game because we were tired. We were trying to emphasise to our fledgling audience then that we were committed to women's cricket in the very same way we are to the men's game, which was the context, and then we did it. And there were roadworks on the M4 went there, and we got stuck for a long time. And I remember the last hour or so, we just sung. We had a whole bunch of snakes, or it was snakes, I'm pretty sure, Haribo as it were, and we were just smashing them while singing as loudly as possible to stay awake because when you're driving that late, having worked a full day, it does come with considerable risk.
Yes. We managed it. We got there, and it's a good thing we did because it was a momentous occasion in the Australian women's game. So this was the third ODI. Australia had won the first two. This basically that made them almost invincible in the series. It meant that they could just play for the draw in Taunton in the Test match. So Australia made 269. England's reply, if you read through the batting card, starts with 0, 4, 5, 0 and 0. This is the peak Amy Jones freaking out about Elise Perry era. So to run through Amy Jones' series to this point from the first ODI, she faced 3 balls from Megan Shute and then got out to the first ball she faced from Perry, caught behind for 0. Second game, faced an over from Shute, managed to glance Perry for 4 and then got out fourth ball, chipping a catch to mid-wicket, out for 5. Third ODI, this one, third ball she faces, all from Perry, chips one to mid-wicket for 0. She goes on to play in the next T20. She survives 2 balls from Elise Perry and is so surprised that she gets out to Megan Shute for 0. And then in the second T20, third ball of the day, hits Perry to cover for 0. So Amy Jones in that series, 5 innings, 4 ducks in those first 5 games. And facing Perry, she faced 12 balls, got out 4 times and made 4 runs. So when people wonder why I'm a little sceptical of the bona fides of Amy Jones, that's part of the story.
Yeah, she was in a terrible rut, and that series was when Mark Robinson was moved on from the England women's job. We spoke about the Warwickshire men and him in our previous episode as well, didn't we? But the pressure at the time was just too much because it felt like they'd stalled, having won the World Cup in 2017. That generation were kind of going nowhere at that point, and that was highlighted by the way they performed against Australia, who it was just that they made a documentary about the 2019 Women's Ashes. There was a documentary crew who came around, and I think they interviewed both of us for I don't know, I never saw it, but I assume that we must have been on it because they did interviews with us, but the challenge was that they got fuck all access, and they were relying on the good grace of getting an interview here, an interview there, but it wasn't a proper fly on the wall or anything like it, which has been a challenge when doing projects like that with the Australian women's team. It was the same with the doco that Ange Pipos made, that she had to do the best with what she could. Then they won the tournament, then she got a bunch of interviews at the end. But the actual idea of being fly on the wall, but it's challenging. And it started off when we were in Leicester during a men's World Cup game, and there was nobody there, and they didn't get the scheduling right. It was a bit of a non-event, wasn't it, that series? Even the Test match down in Taunton, which was between the men's World Cup finishing and the men's Ashes starting, they carved out this space for a Test match, and it wasn't an eventful one at all. Weather played its role. Australia had the ability, slow pitch. Australia had the ability, with the way the point system worked and where the Test match fit, to snuff any hope out for England, which was fair enough. It wasn't pretty, but it was fair enough. And England weren't good enough to drag themselves back into it. So yeah, not a series that. I mean, it was good to spend time with lots of great people, but it wasn't a riveting time. And I suspect the doco that was made wasn't especially interesting either.
Well, this spell was probably the most riveting bit because it's Perry just doing a clinic of channel bowling, a bit of inward movement off the seam, a bit of away movement, bit of outswing, and England kept falling into the trap. So Beaumont, LBW, Sarah Taylor caught behind, Golden Duck. Perry doesn't get the hat trick, but gets Heather Knight caught behind a couple of overs later, and then Danny Wyatt when the ball nips back in. So 5 overs, 5 for 12 when you put in the Jones wicket that she started with. Having bowled 7 overs on the trot, had a break for 5 overs and then came back to get Anya Shrubsole bowled with the ball decking in, and then Sophie Eccleston slaps a catch. So after 23 overs, Perry had bowled her full 10. England were 9 wickets down, and she had beaten the previous record of the Doc, Shelley Nitschke, who had 7 for 24 as the best figures for Australia. 7 for 22 trumped that in one-day cricket, and that was the day. And, well, as Kate says, England did manage to come back from that to be a much more convincing team for a couple of years, and they're in that rut at the moment where they've got to find their way back again.
Indeed they do. Thank you, Kate. You've learnt a lot about butt juice from trees and
more than you anticipated.
Elise Perry as well. Worthwhile. Our first long answer of the day. And as we go to our first break as well, Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, Australia's #1 plaintiff law firm. We're proud as punch to be in partnership with them through seasons 18 and 19 on the podcast. Some of Australia's very best lawyers go there. It draws people who want to work in the law in a way that helps working people. That much is certain. So if you need legal assistance, oftentimes on a no-win, no-fee basis, some of the best lawyers in the country will be there at your disposal. If you're injured at work or something along those lines, this is an area where they've got a certain expertise, which extends, of course, to superannuation insurance as well if you're unable to work due to injury or illness. So all of their information's in the show notes. Great to have an organisation working with us who've been around since 1919, which always staggers me to think about how different the world was 160 years ago. And yet Maurice Blackburn remains standing, Australia's #1 plaintiff law firm. We'll be back in just a moment on Storytime 227.
It's the final word. It's Storytime 227. We have Keir, no last name, mysterious Keir, stepping back into the shadows in an underground car park.
The Prime Minister
handed us a manila envelope. Oh, the one where you are.
I think
that
so.
One.
I think that it could be. You know, I don't think Keir Starmer's a cricket guy. I mean, I don't interpret him that way. But you know, like we have to be pragmatic about cricket over here. It's a small sport in the UK relative to what it should be, relative to population. If Keir Starmer hasn't got a background in cricket but wants to engage, and why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he want to engage in our great game of cricket? Then we can take him for the ride. We're not just looking for people who come from backgrounds that are disadvantaged and looking. That's definitely part of the story. Do not get me wrong. But I'm agnostic. I mean, if anyone wants to play cricket, bring him in. They can play for me on a Sunday. It's fine. He wants a game. He plays five-a-side, Starmer. Still plays five-a-side with his mates. I think it's on a Tuesday night. If he's got time for a five-a-side kickabout with his mates, he can play in a Sunday team. Consider this our request of you, Prime Minister. There's time if you're good enough.
Yeah. I mean, you know, if you want to convince him, he doesn't strike me as a guy who believes in anything very much. So I don't know how enthusiastic he'll be, but good luck with trying to talk him into it.
He believes in plenty. He's like, as it is with a lot of people at governing, realising that governing's a lot harder than when people are in the cheap seats. It's a fucking difficult job. So he's doing that. We're doing this. Now we're doing Keir's number, 257, new pledger. What's the clue?
The clue is very short. It's very straightforward. Blue is the colour. That is the clue.
Okay. Blue is the colour. Look, I love answers like this because it's a test player I know by name only, but not a thing more. So I'll explain. We'll keep it simple. I'm not going to drag out the suspense. Test cap 257 is kind of perfect for this. A fun era, early 1970s. And here I'm going to tell you about a man called David Collie, known as the Blue Collie. Yes, it is. Blue Collie or Fox. You know, either of those two nicknames work here. So I'm certain in the answer and I'm certain in the workings here because Pat Rogers was involved and this is very much Pat Rogers' energy. Now, this was at his club of Mossman, where he was known as the Fox, where he debuted as a 16-year-old in 1963 in the first team. He would play there till he was nearly 40 in the 1980s. So he's a proper lifer of that proud club. New South Wales
honours for Leicestershire.
Indeed. New South Wales honours were earned in 1969-70, the start of an 87 game first-class career, most of which was at the Blues. Back to the start, he was born in 1947 and grew up in the northern suburbs. He originally played threes at Mossman as a 12-year-old boy. And that happened to be the first time he played on turf, full stop. So you could say that he was kind of his time. If he was born in, 47, so that's the late 50s in suburban Sydney, which would have been interesting. His first grade ball on debut when he was 16 in first grade, this is, on a green top was a hat-trick delivery, and it took his hat off. So he faced up to a hat-trick ball as a 16-year-old boy in first grade and took his hat off. And
Laurie Nash must have been bowling
indeed.
to bump him on the hat-trick ball.
And you get a sense of like the era he played in and who he crosses over with. So Richie Benaud was still playing grade cricket in Sydney at that time, and he played against him, which is pretty cool. Our man here had a marathon approach to the crease, which made him stand out maybe as much as his shock of dark hair. I saw a bunch of photographs of him. He was quite easy on the eye, as they said then, and he would have stood out, I'm certain of that. And he was pretty consistent for New South Wales from the moment he got his chance in 69-70. He was kind of good for like high 20s or low 30s wicket per season at about 30 or just beneath 30. And so it proved in 71-72 when he took 33 at 29. And this is at an era where New South Wales are never near the top. I was surprised by this looking through the Shield returns for New South Wales from the mid-60s through to the early 80s. They very rarely were in the top few states. They were regularly actually down the bottom. So this is mostly the era when Collie is playing for New South Wales when they're not in the top couple of teams in the country. So 33 at 29 in a team that's not dominating provides context around that. And indeed, says to me why he was picked on that 72 Ashes trip. He was kind of the bolter, though, a bit of his like the Wayne Holdsworth of 1993, some 21 years on from that, for that tour of England in 1972. But he takes the opportunity and he makes it count. Down at Arundel, again, we've mentioned Arundel a couple of times this week, he picked up 4 for 44 in the traditional Duke of Norfolk's 11 game, which used to start every Ashes trip. Bring it back, I say. We have an annual game at Arundel in my world. It should be a once every 4 years, rather, game for the Australians as well. I'm sure they can make that work. Then he took back-to-back fifers against Surrey and Gloucestershire, the second of which was a bag of 5 for 27. So he's going very, very nicely early in the trip. And then takes a couple of threefers, one against Derbyshire and one at Edgbaston against Warwickshire. And after that, he hears McGilvray filing a radio report back to Australia saying that David Collie had pushed himself into contention to play the first test match. And so it proved. Ian Chappell, as he later described it, gave him the nod. He was in. He was going to be playing and making his Australian test debut at Old Trafford not that he wore cap 257. We didn't really talk about cap numbers back then, but he was going to be the 257th test player for the Australian men. And the 72 Ashes is one of those great Ashes series where the winner of the first test match doesn't eventually win the series. Doesn't play out too often like that in the history of Ashes cricket. But at Old Trafford, England won by 89 runs thanks to Tony Greig making substantial contributions in 3 of the 4 innings. It was when he was really establishing himself as the star all-rounder, not only for England but around the world for a number of years there. Now, our man, the Blue Collie, made his debut along with Bruce Francis, who is better known for helping orchestrate the Rebel tours to South Africa in the 1980s. If you haven't as yet, please do read Dan Brettig's journalism going back to acknowledge what happened 40 years ago. It's excellent work. He's spoken to everybody in that classic Dan Brettig way, where he tries to sort of stitch together what happened and why through the early 80s. But yeah, the man who the Blue Collie debuted with was Bruce Francis, who in more recent times became someone who said some pretty rogue stuff from time to time, would often appear on Alan Jones's show. I remember, Jeff, back when we were early days in our journalism careers. So had that reputation as being someone who was always able to...
cricketer having a weird relationship with Alan Jones. That's only happened 20 to 25 other times.
Yep, you've got it. This one might have been more sort of, age appropriate. Anyway, Collie, 3 for 83 from 33 overs in his first test innings with the ball. So perfectly acceptable figures. He bowled Brian Luckhurst for his first wicket. Now, segue here. Brian Luckhurst's son, Tim, is the outgoing chairman of the Lord's Taverners. And Tim, who's a terrific guy, I've played a bit of cricket with him, but just a great man, ran the London Marathon a couple of weeks ago and did some wonderful work fundraising there. So g'day, Tim, if you're listening, son of Brian, former England opener. In the case of Collie, he also picked up Tony Gregg for 57.
Brian Luckhurst was involved with running Kent when around about the time of the tree situation. I'm pretty sure he was.
That makes sense. Yep.
I think he was the one who sort of led the thing to get a replacement tree ready because they knew that the other tree was going to go. I'm pretty sure that was Brian Luckhurst's. I think he might have passed away before the replacement tree was planted or inaugurated or whatever it was, but he was involved. I've got a memory of that from what I was reading about.
Well, we have done Luckhurst's story on Storytime before. I remember sending it to Tim at the time, and I guess the culmination of it, despite being quite respectful, was a butting of heads of sorts with Boycott, who at the time wanted to go in a different direction.
Believe. Yeah. Hard to imagine. How could it happen?
Collie had a striking run-up, similar to Jon Snow, long. It was known for being long. So he stood out when bowling in this first test match. He also picked up Luckhurst for a duck in the second innings, caught behind. So he keeps his spot for Lord's 72, which is one of the most famous test matches of its time. Because another bloke debuted at Lord's in the second test of that series and went on to take 16 wickets in it, Bob Massey. But that's not the only noteworthy thing that happened at Lord's that week. There's the 131 from Greg Chappell, who he describes that as his best test innings. I interviewed Greg about that years ago, and that still stands out to him. And when we asked Ian Chappell about that innings as well, where he made 56, but it wasn't quite so much about the making of 56, it was his willingness to keep hooking, having received a telephone call. I think his mum called him after the first test at Old Trafford and said, "Stop hooking." And he said, "Oh, no, I won't stop hooking." And he kept hooking at Lord's to 56, having been caught that way, I think twice at Old Trafford. Anyway, that was the brothers Chappell both contributing to a big first innings score and the 2 8-wicket bags from Massey. And that's what, when Collie was interviewed later in his career, he said it was also the best innings that he ever saw was Chappell's 131. I think he said to me he played exclusively in the V. It's one of those classic Greg Chappell innings where he did things really on his terms. So Collie returned 2 nunfers in that test, which, there's no wickets to share around, is there? Because Massey's taking all of them. So not a huge amount he can do about that. The third test match was at Notts, and he kept his spot. And look, he's useful again, like really useful. It's a draw. But he takes 2 for 58 from 23.3 in the first innings, bowling first change, gets John Edrich caught behind, and then he makes a really important 54 down the list batting at number 9. In the absence of that 54, it's entirely possible that Australia don't draw that test match and England are 2-1 up after 3. So he's played a role, couple of wickets and a 50, but no bags of wickets. So that's kind of where the story ends from an Australian perspective. He's left out after the third test. And I always feel sorry for guys like that who did really nothing to warrant them being dropped. He wasn't match winning. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but he didn't underperform necessarily. He contributed.
All you can do is contribute. Really.
And there's context as well. He takes his test wickets at sort of 45 or something like that, 50. But the point is that in one of those test matches, one bloke took 16 of the 20. And there's the half century that I referred to and taking 3 wickets on his test debut in that first innings, getting the opener out both times. So he far from disgraced himself, anything but in those 3 test matches in cap 257. Back to New South Wales, he contributed until 77, 78, all up, took 236 wickets at 23.8, which reinforces that at first-class level he really was a gun of his time. There's a first-class century in there as well. A great time to play. Enjoyed that wonderful tour in that era of 1972. I read back an interview that he did in more recent times. Fair to say that he's quite old school, Jeff, in his views. He compared T20 cricket to the COVID virus, for example, and said that they should call it a different name. He didn't think the T20 should be allowed to be called cricket because it's his view was that it was going to destroy the game and so on. And this isn't like something that he said in 2003. This is like 4 years ago. And basically, according to David Collie, everybody is crap. He was asked who his favourite commentator is, and he said they're all rubbish, they're all garbage. So he's that kind of personality where he's quite punchy, quite old school, He had 6 operations on his body.
Do you reckon he rings in? Does he call up SEN and
give you an spray? Yeah, maybe. Yep. Well, he's welcome to if he wants to. Had 6 operations after his career ended on different parts of his body from that long, bustling run-up, which earned him 3 Test matches in 72 and had a heart bypass in recent times as well. He's 78 years of age. Now, David Collie, the Blue Collie, the Fox, who for Keir wore cap 257 in 3 Test matches for Australia.
Love it. And I wonder if was Keir involved with David Colley's more local cricket career, something like that.
Would make sense.
I've got a suspicion there might be something there.
He took 527 wickets for Mossman as well. Oof. So a huge career that, as I said, extended like over 20 years playing first grade. So, you got to really want it. And this bloke, the Fox clearly did.
Yeah, and it's something I have a lot of respect for is those players who are at that level and do the work to be able to break through and have their moment at the top. Most Test cricketers don't have long careers. Most of them have very short ones. Most common number of Test matches played is 1.
Yeah, we went through it the other week, just how many 1 Test capped players there are for Australia. It's far more than you'd think. It's far more than you would think if you. I think what did we work out? 15% of Test cricketers.
Yeah, was it 70 players or something?
Yeah, so it's a fairly significant chunk who get 1 opportunity. So, in Collie's case, getting 3 of them.
Yeah, so next most common would be 2, and then 3. We've got 2 for our next pledge because it's a double header. I haven't had a double header in so long.
Yeah.
Helen Wilson and George Pearson both sent through $6.09. Helen in Australian currency, George in US. Now, they're probably not the same answer, but they might be the same answer. So in case they're the same answer, we double-header them. We put them together, and then, George, if your number is something else, you can send us a message. We'll come back to it on a revisit. And this was based on a sort of nudge in a certain direction that Helen sent me in a message. It could be George's answer as well. This message directed me towards a certain Test match. So 609 is the number. We know that Jeff Boycott played 609 first-class matches. That's not the answer, but he does play in Test match 609 as well, which is the match that I'm looking at. And a lot of people who you've mentioned come up, Edrich and there were quite a few earlier on the show who I'd flagged. Now, mercifully, this is not a Boycott story. He doesn't feature prominently, although he was there. He doesn't make many runs, and we don't have to talk about him a great deal at all. It's 1966, the England summer, against the West Indies when they're getting absolutely pumped, England, by Garfield Sobers' touring side. It's also the summer that England win the Football World Cup, so most attention is there. And you and I spoke about this summer, Adam, a few months ago when we talked about Colin Milburn.
Right, yeah.
The big, hefty hitting opener who got put into open in the Test side and made a bunch of runs, even though England were getting pantsed in the series. Made a famous 100 in a draw, nearly made another 100. He's the only one making runs. England are losing. They lose the first Test by an innings. They have very much the worse of a draw and then escape via Milburn on the last day, whacking that 100 in counter-attacking style rather than grinding it out. They lose the third Test by 139 runs and they lose the fourth Test by an innings. So they're getting bashed, and it's not until the fifth Test when things start to go right for England. Before that fifth Test, there is a classic England selection cleaning of house. They do James Sutherland at Hobart in 2016. They come down and put the broom through the team before the fifth Test. So 5 changes. They sack the captain first of all. So Cowdrey, you mentioned earlier, Cowdrey is out. Brian Close comes in to captain England for the first time. He's already in the 11, but he's chosen as captain. I think he's in the 11 earlier in the series, although I don't think he plays the fourth Test. He might have played earlier. They effectively use that to extend the batting, so they lean more on their all-rounders. So they bring in Dennis Amos, who we've interviewed on the show before, but they don't lose a batting place. They squeeze out one of their bowlers down the order, which is Fred Titmus, and they push Brian Close down to bat at 7. And then to make up for that, they get a lot more bowling out of the top 6. So Basil D'Oliveira is playing. They get him to bowl a lot, and they have a guy called Bob Barber who opens the batting but also bowls leg breaks.
That's right, yeah.
So they're both playing in the fourth test, Dolly and Bob, but they bowl a lot more in the fifth. England then swap their spinners. Ray Illingworth comes in, Derek Underwood out. They swap wicket keepers. John Murray comes in, Jim Parks goes out. And then maybe the strangest choice of all, they bring in Bill Edrich and they drop Colin Milburn, who is the leading run scorer in the series, 316 runs at 52. But he's overweight and the selectors keep worrying about him being he's too fat to play. He's not good in the field.
I really hope they brought in John Edrich, not Bill. That would have been a stretch. It was John.
John. Yes, it was John. Bill was. I don't know if Bill was still with us.
Well, he would have been with us, but he would have been, I don't know, into his 50s by then. I'm pretty sure. But still,
you know what I mean.
I know what you mean, because John Edrich made his triple ton. Yeah, he made his triple ton in 65, didn't he, the year before? So that would stand to reason.
Yes. So, a reasonable player to bring in, but stiff to drop the guy who's by far the leading run scorer in the series for England. But he doesn't look like a cricketer, and the selectors have been kind of uncomfortable that he keeps making runs and making them continue picking him. So they decide to not continue picking him. Aesthetics trump results, as happens often in that game. Now, the changes mostly work. So Bob Barber, the part-time leggy, D'Oliveira with his little mediums, and Close, they take 5 wickets between them. There are some pretty good specialist bowlers too. Illingworth, quality. John Snow is playing. He's the big, scary, quick who runs in and belts the ball down. And there's another tall, fast bowler called Ken Higgs, who we have spoken about here and there on the show, but isn't one of the most memorable names, although he has a huge first-class career. So between them, they restrict West Indies to 268, pretty good, but they're playing the West Indies A team in terms of bowling until you get to the greats of the 80s, really. So Wes Hall, Charlie Griffith, Gary Sobers, and Lance Gibbs, they are the 4 bowlers who held the record of being the 4 frontline bowlers to play the most number of test matches together until Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood, Lyon came along and comprehensively beat that record. So that West Indies 4, they played, I think, 22 test matches together, which was by a long way then a record for a quartet of frontline bowlers. Of course, Sobers bats in the top 6. But.
Yeah, I wonder what the record is for like the number of cricketers. Like, is there a record for the number of times that 9 players have featured in the same test team that would be more than? Because you could imagine a world where, like, the Australian top 6 or something, like even in this Windies team, right? You've got Conrad Hunt would have played a lot of test matches with the aforementioned 4. Basil Butcher, Seymour Nurse, Seymour Butts as well. I mean, there's some pretty consistent names there.
The record for an 11 is very low. So Australia had the same 11 2013-14 Ashes, and I think that might be the record, 5 test matches with an identical 11, something like that. It's lower than you would intuit from memory. It might be because even that sort of dominant Steve Waugh style Australian team, there's an 11 that you can rattle off with a Gillespie, McGrath, Lee, Warne bowling attack with Gilchrist and a couple of wars in the top 6 and so on. But there were almost always changes. There was always somebody shuffling in and out.
Yeah, I guess I'm more interested in like 8 or 9. 8 or 9 players all featuring, because then you don't have to worry about the specifics of the 4. Like
the longest running core of a team.
Yeah, more. Yeah, that's probably where I'm getting to. Because then you can afford to have 1 or 2 drop out at any given time. It's like, anyway. I'm sure someone could work that out, a version of that for us, and probably will, because that's the nature of the show. I'd be
interested in what the Hayden, Langer, Ponting, War, A&R,
Langer, that's
well, Langer, when Langer's opening. But even that's only a couple of years, because then Steve Waugh retires a couple of years after Langer comes back in. So, these numbers tend to be pretty low. So that's why these 4 bowling together so many times is a big deal. And they're on top. They're a bloody good bowling attack. Wes Hall is Wes Hall. And England are 4 down at 126. They're 5 for 130. They're 6 for 150. They're 7 for 166. So they're well behind, and it looks like they're pretty well stuffed. Murray, who's the keeper, is batting at number 9 behind Illingworth. So that suggests that he's not necessarily the greatest with the stick. And it's an interesting one. Very long career at first-class level, Murray, but he averages 23 with the bat across that huge career. So he's not a big run scorer. he's a proper pro. He's playing in his 15th year as a first-class player. He will end up with 600-plus first-class matches and at one point holds the world record for keeping dismissals with over 1,500 of them. He's batting with Tom Graveney, future England selector, who's batting at number 4. And they settle in. And this partnership, they bat and they bat and they bat. They had 160-odd by the end of day 2, another 50 or more on day 3. Rob Steen writes about this as a formative childhood memory watching this partnership, which he describes as a counter-seduction. I quite enjoyed this paragraph. He says, aggression was unseen, unsensed. Artistry and impassiveness ruled. The score mounted to the sound of metronomic clicks and deeply satisfying plinks. As the boundaries flowed, gentle applause rippled from the screen. Every 4 was a small but significant victory, yet emotion there was none. No cavorting or leaping into each other's arms, no chants or supportive roars from the terraces, merely a faint hum of joy and a growing feeling that everything might just be all right. So this partnership goes on. Murray goes on to 112, one of the 16 first-class hundreds that he makes, which sounds like quite a lot, but he batted 936 times in his first-class career for 16 tons. So he wasn't a ton machine. Talk about picking your moment. Graveney makes 165 and then gets run out. They're both out in quick succession. But as so often happens when a partnership has pretty much broken the bowling team, the tail chips in. Ken Higgs and John Snow. Ken Higgs, another one with a huge career, played 511 matches in first-class cricket. He's 9 years into his career. He will play for another 20 years after this. And in that time, he batted 530 times and made 3 half-centuries. But he makes one of them on this occasion. Yeah.
How good.
So he makes 63. Snow makes 59 not out. They put on 128. They're 2 runs away from what was then the record for the last wicket partnership, put on by Chip Foster and Wilfred Rhodes. A few have gone past it since, the Tino Best partnership, the Ashton Agar, Phil Hughes partnership, the Joe Root, Jimmy Anderson one. Yeah. But Ken Higgs and John Snow still 9th overall. John Snow, the wildling. I went to the hot spring in Iceland with Cam Fink where John Snow filmed the scene, the famous scene with his wildling companion. It's incredibly hot. It's very nondescript. There's this cave. There's a little sign. There's nothing about Game of Thrones, but you can find the cave and then you go down through these rocks and then you're in this underground cavern with this like wildly hot spring, which they're like, you're not really, it's not sort of publicly accessible, but you can find it. And they're like, probably don't swim in it. So, of course, we swam in it. It's so hot. We had to wear socks to go in it because otherwise your toes were going to burn off. That's how hot the water was. It was intense.
I love that, though. That's what I want. There is no tap that can be too hot for me. Mm-hmm. Let's bring it on. Bring it on.
It's, what's it called? Grotagia. I don't know. My Icelandic pronunciation's not that great, aside from Eyjafjallajökull. But anyway, England end up on 527. They lead by more than 250. Another group effort with the ball sees them win by an innings. Brian Close's first match captaining England, coming in from Yorkshire. And he supposedly tells his players that, they've all been pretty shit. The team's been pretty shit. Everyone's been shit. And that's why he's got the job. And that's why you guys who've been picked to come in for the 5th test have got the job. So we'd better turn it around. And he's able to put a bit of pepper up them and get a result. He works out sobers. This is like the real captaincy bit from this series, is that in the 4th innings, he knows that it depends on getting Sobers out, and he knows that Sobers likes hooking. So he asks John Snow to bowl a bouncer first ball, and Close sticks himself in at short leg. So he's willing to get absolutely lamped if Sobers gets onto it. But Sobers mistimes the shot, pops the ball up, golden duck. And that's Brian Close's masterstroke to make sure that they win the test, keeps the captaincy through the next summer against India and Pakistan, and wins almost all those tests, and then gets sacked for time wasting in a county game when the selectors decided that was unsportsmanlike and unseemly to get a win for Yorkshire. And that was it for Brian Close, who still has the best winning percentage for an England captain who captained more than a couple of times. So I think that's where we're looking, is that partnership, that comeback. I don't know if Helen's a big Brian close fan, but I think it's got to be Test Match 609.
Yeah, well, the book that's out about it could well be the book that's out about Brian Close at the moment, that Helen Wilson has read it and was inspired by that and sent in a clue that reflects that. Right, before we move to our next break, NordVPN, the thing you need.
It's the one.
The thing you need.
It's the one.
When you
I just renewed, Adam. I just renewed. Now
4 more years.
We're 4 more years. You pretty much can get 4 years. We were both with Nord before they were sponsors. So I was like, you know what? I paid for it once. Let's go again. And they will give you just about, I think you can do 28 months. I think if you do the 2-year one, you get 4 months free, as well as also getting the discount. So you use our link and you get the huge discount. But then if you do the longer deal, you get 4 months on top of the discount. They're just giving away VPNs at this point.
What a deal. Mountains beyond mountains. There's no end in sight of your NordVPN membership. Enjoy it. Be there. Now, I'm trying to think what I've used it for recently. I know I've had it on.
I think we should make the point about cyber security and safety, because it's not just about watching a show when you're in another country.
No.
It's also about
it ends up being quite a big part of it.
It does end up. It's not just about that. It's not the only part. It ends up being something where you've got cybersecurity is important. You've got these people traveling to the USA and having to put their phones in microwaves and stuff before they go, so that all of their data doesn't get hijacked at the border. You've got situations where people may be monitoring you, and you don't want them monitoring you, because they're not supposed to be doing that. You've got bad actors on the internet who try to use insecure Wi-Fi connections and things like that to steal your information. Bad actors.
The worst actors. They're all there trying to fuck you over.
The cast of Cobra Kai are trying to hack your account. Highly enjoyable. Terrible acting, but I finished it recently. Had a great time. Not going to lie about it. It was, it was exactly as I wanted it to be, which is bad acting that's fun to watch. But bad acting when they're stealing your credit card details and your logins and things like that, less fun to watch.
That's good.
So this is a way where if you've got a VPN, you've got a tunnel of safety, if you will. You've got it's a prophylactic measure. You've got a protective coating around your internet experience that means that your things aren't going to get stolen, your data's not going to get hacked. I've just worked out what in Australian dollars it's $5.20 a month, according to my conversion rate. I don't know if that's exactly what they charge, but if I were to convert what I would be charged in Europe, that's what it would cost. $5 a month. And
it's a cup of coffee. It's a cup of coffee a month when you boil it down. I mean,
it's half a cup of coffee in Melbourne now.
Well, yeah, $5 a month. It's a cup of coffee. It's what it basically boils down to, wherever you are. So I've seen that comparison used before. And to think about the ways in which you'll use it, nordvpn.com/TFW to get your healthy discount, to make sure that you're protected, that you've got that tunnel of protection, whatever you described it as before, the prophylactic of sorts when you're on the internet. And you can also protect against price gouging and, of course, watch all the shows that you want to watch when you want to watch them, where you want to watch them. That will be nordvpn.com/TFW for all the things you require. Back in a moment to round out the show with a couple more numbers. Storytime 227. Adam Collins, Jeff Lemon, and Odin Mortgage and Tax are our other partner on the show right now through the month of May, which is terrific. We've just received a message from them saying they've been enjoying our work, which we love. We're enjoying their work as well. For we are expats. We just talked before the break about living away from home and needing to be protected when you're using the internet, or indeed wanting to have access to what you would in other parts of the world. Well, consider Odin Mortgage and Tax. Obviously, it's not the same thing, but the same principle at play. People move around the world in ways like they never have before. They live in different countries. There is the famous mobility visa in the UK, where people come for a couple of years, they meet a British girl, they try and get sponsored, they get indefinite leave to remain, then they move back when their kids are in school. Everybody does that. If you're one of those people, then give yourself the opportunity to not be fucking scrambling. I think that's the main thing with financial arrangements. You don't want to be scrambling. You want to be lined up. You want things to be linear. You don't want speed bumps. You don't want things to knock you off course. And if you're with Odin Mortgage and Tax, you can do as more than 2,000 people have done in 40 countries and work with somebody or work with an organization who are there. Their MO. Their reason for existence is helping people who are living outside of Australia, who either have mortgages or wish to have mortgages in Oz, or have tax arrangements which require more than a second's thought, as it will be for practically anybody who's not living in Australia at the time that they are still feeling Australian. There you go. There's the pitch, Jeff. Any more to add?
I like it. It makes sense. It makes sense to me. All I have to add is find the URL in the show notes. Check them out. Free tax consult, cheap tax consult, free mortgage consult. That's how it works.
That's it.
There's no reason why not to. We've got a number from Stephen Walsh. Stephen Walsh, not the almost Stephen Wells. I just wondered if the Geelong recruiter was lobbing in, but not quite. It's Stephen Walsh. He is Australian, and he must be a Murali pledger. He must have come in the Meet Murali surge. If you want to join up on Patreon, you always win a few, lose a few at the end of the month. So we're just on that 800 now, but we'd like to keep a bit of a margin on Murali. So if you want to jump in and help us stay ahead of the greatest, most prolific test bowler ever, please do. Stephen Walsh, $5.43, said the pledge relates to where I am right now, which is in Gaul. Although perhaps that's now too easy. There's no such thing as too easy, Stephen. It's not about the difficulty. It's about the story.
Well, yes. Here's the thing. It's Murali. It's Warne. It's the Warne Murali Trophy, or the Murali Warne Trophy. I can't remember anymore. Is
Creepy Hands Trophy. The disembodied horror house hands trophy.
When I was in Gaul recently covering the 2 test matches for it, a number of times I found myself in the administration office at Gaul, which you'd remember from last time, where the guys that run the ground, they remembered me from last time, hassling them for various things, not just bottles of water, not just keys, but, that's the engine room of that ground. And the trophy simply sits on top of a filing cabinet in there. Nothing to, flash about it when the trophy returns to Sri Lanka before it's handed out again.
It's probably not getting stolen, It's probably like the degree of security for, say, the Melbourne Cup when it goes around, given it's made of gold, that's high. The degree of security for the bit of wood with the die-cast reproduction of Shane Warne's hand on it, probably not on the black market. You're probably not getting a huge payday if you bring that into a illegitimate collector, I would have thought.
Right, so to the car chase as it was last time, it's clearly Warne's 5 for 43 in his first test match back in 2004, which we, spent a disproportionate amount of time discussing on radio during those 2 test matches because it stands out. It's such a striking story. And there are Warne pictures all over the ground, which is partly due to the support that he provided to Sri Lanka and Gaul specifically after the tsunami at the end of 2004 and early 2005. But it was earlier in 2004, the March thereof, where he picked up his 500th wicket in Test cricket. He'd also played there in 1999 in a less successful mission, but it was a significant place for Warne due to the milestone and the return Test match and so on. Now, it's a little bit misremembered, this test, because Australia end up steamrolling them, but it's not as easy as that early on. They're bowled out for 220 on day one, with Murali taking a 6-for and fizzing it through. Then Sri Lanka get 281. It's a healthy first innings lead. Warne 5 for 116 upon his return to the Test team. Australia then click into gear and make 512 for 8 declared. Hayden, Martin and Lehman all make outstanding hundreds after Lehman made a really important 50 in the first innings as well. Murali gets a 5 for again, so he finishes with 10 11 for the match, but it takes him 56 overs to get the 5 wickets. So the frames change a little bit on Murali and the risk that he represents in that series. And then they're set 352 to win. Sri Lanka, however unlikely, and they're bowled out for 154. And that's where Warne takes his 5 for 43 from 15 overs. However, a few things jumped out at me here, Jeff, one of which is just one of those lovely quirks. In the second innings, Shane Warne bowled the first over of it. Don't see that too often. Well, indeed, you don't see it at all. He only bowled the first over an innings once, and it was in his return Test match in 2004. There was only one other time
he
when
the second over
once. He bowled the second over once. That was against South Africa at Sydney in 2002. So a real rarity and an oddity as far as Warne's long career, 145 Test matches to have only done it once.
I could swear it was more. Yeah. Like I could swear there were a few times when I suppose we were more used to seeing it in a modern context, or in India particularly. You see Ashwin open the bowling in
all the time. Yeah,
the second innings of a match, particularly quite often. Maybe not the first. I could have sworn I remember Steve Waugh doing it, a few times, not a lot, but I'm surprised it was only 2.
Was this a Steve Waugh team? Of course it was. Yeah. No, hang on.
04, no, he would have finished.
No,
he would
it
have
was
just
Ricky's
finished.
team. What am I saying? Of
Yeah.
course it was Ponting's team. So yeah, one of 2 times in his career he bowled at the start of an innings, and the only time where he opened. So he was on 491 wickets when he finished the previous stint of his Test career, shall we put it. November of 2002 was his previous Test match at Perth against England, when Australia won the Ashes, or retained the Ashes, in 10 days. So we're into March 04 here. So quite a lot of time has passed, and it's worth remembering that no one was 100% sure what was going to happen here. The drugs ban was lifted very late in the season. It was on the 9th of February where he was able to return to cricket, and they orchestrated a game for him. I remember this. They drummed up a second 11 fixture for him to play against the Queensland Institute of Sport. I took a look at the scorecard. I was there, of course. I was not long before I was starting my second year of uni, and I went down to Junction Oval to watch Warne bowl, naturally, in my 1986 VL Commodore red, very red, very sort of sharpish light red. Had a spoiler on it. Had the Holden Racing Team side skirting. I didn't buy the car for these reasons, by the way. It was just the only car that I could get my hands on that was a manual and cost about, the amount of money I was willing to part with as just having turned 18. Did the trick for a couple of years, more than
What was it? What was the clobber? What did you have on when you climbed out of it?
Watching Warne bowl that day. What was I wearing?
Yeah.
That's well, look, I can guess. I would have been wearing at the time, I would have been wearing a pair of baggy shorts, skate shoes, ankle socks, and maybe early 04, I might have been wearing my Strokes fan club T-shirt, my Alone Together Strokes fan club T-shirt, which I knew.
That makes sense.
I wish I knew where it was now. I had not long hair, probably as long as your hair is now, Jeff. It was kind of curly. I regrettably cut my hair in first year of uni, and it grew back kind of curly. And by that point, I was back into not quite ponytails or anything like that, but it was longish. It required a headband when I was running in bowling, put it that way.
Right.
Or maybe didn't require it, but I chose to go that direction.
It complemented a headband.
Complemented it. Right. So,
I just wanted the full picture of clambering out of the red spoiler Commodore with the Strokes shirt on. That's a bit of a clash.
It is a
bit
clash.
Of a contrast.
No, it is. It is very much a clash. Yeah.
Should have had a diesel shirt on or something.
The car didn't meet my personality. It was what was available. I quite liked it. It was fun. So the first wicket that Warne took back in these ranks was a chap by the name of Aaron Nye, who was caught behind by Peter Roach, who I name dropped but weeks ago when referring to the fact that I so desperately wished to do an episode on when he replaced Darren Berry in the Shield team while he was captaining. He was playing in the twos. This was the season where Victoria won the Shield and broke the drought in 03-04. This was only a couple of weeks after the death of David Hooks as well. It's worth saying here that Hooks passed away, I think it was the very first week of 2004. So we're not far away from that trauma within Victorian cricket around the time of Hooksy's funeral that Warnie's ban lifted. But yeah, Aaron Nye was caught behind by Peter Roach, who was the number 2 keeper for Victoria. Nye's first class debut, he made 100 in a game that we only raised last week. It was Steve Waugh and Mark Waugh's last first class appearance together, which must have been around the time of the second 11 game. Aaron Nye hit a very fast 100 for Queensland, which nearly ruined the final game for Mark Waugh and Steve Waugh, where Mark overtook Steve's first class average in their final innings together, which Norcross and I took some delight in last week, where Waugh made 73 from 45 balls to just nudge above Steve on that metric, when, of course, Steve's test numbers were far better than Mark's. But on first-class numbers, Mark just nudged ahead of him, of course, both extraordinary careers. Aaron Nye ended up briefly caddying Adam Scott at one point, where he was mates with him from childhood. He didn't have a long career, but he did make a bit of an impression with 100 on first-class debut. Anyway, Warne's return, there weren't that many weeks. So the first test match was starting on the 8th of March, which turned out to be, now I remember it, that was the final day of when Victoria won the Sheffield Shield. I remember being at the G, going to the London Tavern after they'd won over there in Richmond and watching on the TV as Australia walked out and took the field in the first Test match. So there you go. That all ties back together to that Victorian first 11 side, which won the Shield under Darren Berry, young Cameron White, Ian Harvey, Matt Elliott, big 100 in the first innings, Brad Hodge, 90-odd. That was a pretty bloody strong Victorian team. They made 700, I think, in that first innings. Anyway. But Warne wasn't going to be playing in that because by that stage he was already in Sri Lanka. But yeah, I found it interesting going through all of the Shane Warne Cricket Archive games, and I mean every game, that he could play in the intervening weeks after the drug ban lifted and through to when he was able to go over to Sri Lanka, just to see how much bowling he got under his belt. He did bowl quite a bit. He bowled in a Sheffield Shield and a one-day game in Tasmania. Nothing special about the numbers, although he did take 4 for 51 in the second innings against Tassie, but a 2, a 1 for. Played a one-day game against WA, picked up 1 for 43, then played a couple of tour games that were first-class fixtures as well, where he picked up a couple of wickets. So he did get some bowling under his belt, which meant that he had more than just having played for lashings, right? Because until that point, let's go back to the drugs ban for a moment, shall we? So, and what a circus all of this was. He was sent back to Australia the day before the 2003 World Cup. It seemed impossible to believe. I remember I was driving my car, the aforementioned Red VL, and hearing this news come up on the radio that Shane Warne had been sent home. It was like, what on earth is going on here? He was meant to retire from one-day international cricket at that World Cup, become a world champion again. It was going to be the classic Shane Warne fairy tale. But no one at that point had ever heard of what a diuretic was. I doubt anyone's heard of one since. It's something that's so very linked to Shane Warne, isn't it? The fluid tablet that he'd received from his mum, or so it was said, and was designed for him to lose weight. Also, of course, a masking agent. It's worth saying that when Shane Warne returned to that one-day team, the Australian one-day team in January, he looked fitter and trimmer and more muscular than ever. There were so many photographs of him with his shirt off. He looked unbelievable. He did his shoulder on the 9th of December 2002. I remember being there for that as well, and his follow-through. He was nowhere near as svelte as that when he came back. I'm not saying that he definitely took drugs. I'm not making that accusation, but there was enough at the time, those who wanted to mount the case that Warne was accelerating his rehab had plenty of evidence to point to, or not evidence, that's the wrong word. They had plenty to grab onto. Circumstantial evidence. Yeah, that's it.
Reasons for suspicion and the short turnaround, because that he came back from that injury really quickly.
So quickly, yeah.
And a lot of, quicker than expected. I think it was 5 weeks in the end. It was supposed to be 8 or 10 or whatever it was. And players who do recover quickly from injury sometimes do that with the aid of some things that they're not supposed to have, and then they look to flush those things out of their systems with diuretics, and hence it all being banned.
That's it. That was it. And which is why CA oversaw their own panel. And I remember this. It was before Sky News covered every last moment and there was rolling television. This was the equivalent of it. I can see myself sitting on the floor of my grandmother's house where I was living at the time, kind of watching the rolling updates, not just on cable television, but this was on Channel 9 and Channel 7 with cameras out the front, rolling coverage to see what would happen to Shane Warne. It was a national event. Of course, he pled his case, but Peter Taylor, the former Australian spinner, was responsible for convening that panel, and they eventually gave Warne a 12-month ban, which was seen as a good result. There was lots of chat of it being a minimum 2 years. And some
Dick Pound.
Dick
furious.
Pound. Well,
Jacques Rogge, all those guys, they were the drug. Dick Pound was should be 2 years. Should have been 2 years.
I think Dick Pound was making the case it should be 4. That it should be 4 years. So Dick Pound was out there from WADA. And look, nothing came of that because ultimately it was a less sophisticated system, and what CA had agreed to through that panel is what stood. So he did spend the year in the Northern Hemisphere. Well, he did lots of things that year. He was playing for Lashings in England, which still exists in some form. He was working for Channel 9 in the top-end test matches that Australia played against Bangladesh. He also worked for the St Kilda Football Club, his boyhood team, but he wasn't allowed to officially be on the books due to the drug ban. So they had to use him in a voluntary capacity or something like that. So so much had gone on in that warm cyclone that it is fair to say that no one really knew what would happen when he walked out to play Test cricket. No one doubted that he could still do it, but that's a lot for one to go through. And he's well beyond the early part of his career then as well.
Yep.
But as we described before, Shane Warne goes on to take his 500th wicket in that test. He picked up 11 for the match. He absolutely rattled through them in the second innings. His 500th was eventually a top edge from Hashan Tilakaratne, the Sri Lankan captain, taken by Andrew Simons. So there's some sadness there in that both Warne and Simons passed away within a few months of each other. Nice bit of television commentary where Alan Border's actually the lead on that too. Warne finishes with that 5 for 43, which is our pledge. The final wicket in the sequence, his 501st, is taken by Matt Hayden low and fast, which was his 7th catch of the match, which was a record for an outfielder at the time, might still be actually. And that early days, well, not early, but the days of stump mic technology where they didn't really turn them down and fade them down after the ball. So you can hear Warne when Hayden takes that catch, and it's his 5th for the innings, and it's his second 5 of the match, going, "You fucking beauty," in that classic sort of Shane Warne delivery. And I suppose that's exactly how he would have felt returning to the main stage. Jack Gall, it was said of both of them, and still is, who writes his scripts. Well, the same applied for Shane Warne. Mm-hmm. His scripts were incredible. And that week in Gall, where he picked up his 5 for 43, certainly qualified after that long ban away from the game. And that's all for our new man, Stephen Walsh, who's joined us on the Discord and on the Patreon. And it's great to have you, Stephen.
Jump on. If you're so inclined, join Stephen Walsh and maybe Stephen Wells at patreon.com/the final word. Help the show keep going. Send us some more numbers, as Joel Emonsen has done, who sent us a few over the journey. The number is $4.85. He said, "I actually don't know the answer for my nerd pledge. I'm hoping you can find out for me. I've always wondered why this sequence exists. 48, 53, 61, 64 instead of 48, 52, 56, 60, 64. And now that you've brought it up, Joel, so do we. We wonder as well, because those are England Ashes summers, right, Adam?
Indeed,
You've
they
got
are.
1948 Invincibles tour. They go back in 53.
Coronation summer.
They go back in 56, the Laker 10 for, and all the rest of it, the 19. They go back in 1961,
so
and they
5
go back
years
in
on.
1964.
In 3 years on. So
yes.
It goes in 5s and 3s rather than 4s for a time there.
Yeah, it goes 5-3, 5-3 instead of 4s.
Yep.
This I've rabbit holed on this a bit, I've got to say, and I haven't been able to find any convincing answers. It's interesting how you have an idea, we all have an idea of how the Ashes is supposed to work, but it's been very flexible over the distance, which is something that we've learned while making this show. Even the 5 test thing is only since 1988, 98, 99. So the 97 series in England, they had 6 tests.
Yeah, right? It bounced around, didn't it? So we had 6 tests in England fairly consistently, but not 89. Always. But not always. So you go back to 81, 85. 89, 93, 97 are all played over 6 test matches. But you go back to series that we were referring to before, they were 5 test series, and of course it is thereafter. In Australia, there were 6 test Ashes series. Indeed, there was a 7th test in 1970-71 due to the washout, and they re-established the test, but I think it was referred to as the 7th. As quirky as that was when they played that one-day international. So there wasn't actually 7 tests played, but they reassigned a test because they had the flexibility in the schedule. You go back to 78, 79. That was a 6-test series as well. But I don't think 82, 83 is a 5-test series. So is 86, 87, and then there's no 6-test series after that. So yeah, it's a pick your spot moment as to whether 6 was in vogue or 5.
Yeah, and I wonder if it was because there were 5 major venues in Australia, they stuck with 5 rather than 6, and then England ended up conforming to what was happening in Australia because it had been 5 for a relatively long time. That we have an understanding these days that a series in Australia begins in an odd-numbered year, as it will this year, 2025, and then finishes at the end of the summer in an even-numbered year, and then 18 months later in another odd-numbered year, you have the series in England, and then 2.5 years until you come back to Australia. But that flipped after 2013. The 13-14 summer in Australia was the first time it had been that way. The shenanigans because of the World Cup of early 2015 and not wanting to have the Ashes and the World Cup in the same summer, even though they went on to do that in 2019 in England.
Yeah, it's kind of when you think about it, there are a number of things that should never have happened there. Like we think about the 2013 stretch of 5, right? And that didn't feel right.
Mhm.
But the very fact that they brought that forward by 1 full year.
Well, that one was
Because
correct.
that would have been
you had 09 in England, and then you had
10, 11.
13, but then they brought the next Australian series.
That's what I mean. So the 10, 11 got the 13, 14 gets brought forward 12 months. But then on the other cycle, on the other side of the ledger, England run 2 years between 13 and 15. So there's a generation of Australian cricketers who played in far more Ashes series.
Yep.
Like Peter Siddle's the case in point. Because Siddle plays in 09. That's when he starts his Ashes journey, if you want, better descriptor. There's probably, he'll be the first example of someone who, it must be. And Broad's the other one. Broad and Siddle both started their Ashes journeys in 09, but then played in 10, 11, 13, 14, 15, and then 17, 18, and then 19. So in the space of that 10-year window, they play far more Ashes cricket than would ever been the case going back to probably, I don't know, maybe even the early 20th century, probably.
Yep.
For that frequency.
That was my start working in cricket, was that 2013 Ashes in England. So my first few months were 10 Ashes tests straight, and then 18 months later another tour to England. It did feel insane at the time that it was coming so intensely. But so before that, you've flipped things the other way, where the long gap and the short gap are the other way around. The Australian series begin in even years, like 2010, 11, and then you've got the short gap between the Australian series and the England series, and then the long gap after the series in Australia. That's the way that it works before that 2013 change around. If you go all the way back to the beginning, erratic, everybody wants to come out to Australia and cash in. You've got these professional touring sides effectively pretending to be amateurs. So the years where England teams start coming to Australia, going from the start of the Australian summer, 1876, 1878, 1881, they're non-Ashes tours, and then 1882 again, 1884, 1886, 1887. So they've got an England team in Australia 7 years out of 11 when that cricket really starts heating up, because there's money to be made at that point. And then they get to a 4-year gap for the first time, 4 years to 1891, 3 years to 1894, 3 years to 1897, 4 years to 1901, and then 2 years to 1903. So it's all over the place early. And then after that, they do a couple of 4-year cycles before World War I begins. And then after World War I, the Australian series start being in even years and hit their stride with being every 4 years, 1920, 24, 28, 32, 36, when those series start. And the same after the war, 46, 50, 54, 58, 62. But then Australia also have a 3-year break. They've got 62, 3, and then they've got 65, 6. So that's 3 years. And then they've got a 5-year gap to a series that starts in 1970. But that's the only out of kilter bit in the Australian sequence, basically from World War I, the only one that's not on a 4-year cycle, although they have the non-Ashes tour after World Series cricket. So that ends up being an England visit. What is it, 1 year, 2 years, 2 seasons after the previous one? I know this is all probably getting quite confusing if you're not looking at your notes.
I'm quite into this now. I'm in the weeds with you. Keep going.
Right. So it's curious, right, that you've got that modern run in Australia from 1970 to 2010. It's every 4 years, and then you've got the 3-year gap to 2013, 14, and that's carried through until this day. But in England, it's even more erratic. It's not just that bit in the 1950s. So series in England are in 1878, 1880, 1882, and then the Ashes kicks in formally. Then it's 1884, 86, 88, 1890. They're doing it every second year at this point. And then they go to 3-year spans, 1893, 96, 99, 1902, 1905. They're all on 3-year cycles. And then a 4-year cycle to 1909, a 3-year cycle to 1912. And when they start after the war, 1921, they then wait 5 years to 1926. They're on a 4-year cycle, 1930, 34 and 38. And then our period, the bit that we're interested in, 48, 53, 56, 61, 64. So that bit's weird, but it's not the only bit that's weird, because you've got 4 years to 1968, 4 years to 1972,
then
3 years to 1975, and 2 years to 1977.
And there's a wrinkle there too, because there's the. I'll get this wrong, but which was the year they didn't put the Ashes up?
That's 79.
That's
79-80. That's when England come to Australia. But they have an Ashes series in England in 75 and 77.
Don't they not put the Ashes up for one of the for 77?
79-80.
No, in England, I feel like I feel like 77. I might be wrong here. I feel like there's one instance of the Ashes not being put up or something. But the guts of it is that 75 was done because they saw an opportunity because the World Cup was already on. So the genesis for 75 is a commercial one. Like everything in cricket, it all comes down to making a buck or two, right? Australia were already going to be there owing to the fact that the World Cup was on. So that makes sense. That stands to reason why they brought it forward.
75 and 77 are both Ashes.
They both count. Okay. I don't know why I thought that. Maybe it was to do with how many.
Because it's 79-80.
Played over. No, I get that. The tri-series and all that. But the
and there's the bicentenary test in England. There's a bunch of non-Ashes.
Is it 74 or is it 75 or 77 when they play four instead of 6?
75.
75, right? So that follows immediately, and that's David's deal and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
that immediately follows the inaugural Men's World Cup.
And that's another weird one where you've got an Ashes in Australia, 74-5, backed up immediately by an Ashes in England.
Yeah.
A few months later. So that's another one. And then another one 2 years later, having had one in England. So 72, 75 and 77, effectively in 6 seasons, they played 3 Ashes series in England, which is bizarre in itself. So I guess the point I'm making here, Joel, is that sequence is not the only weird sequence. There are a lot of weird sequences, and there'd be different reasons for all of those weird sequences. It's really only after 77 that England settle on a 4-year cycle to 81, 85, 89, 93, 97, 2001, 2005, 2009, 2013, and then they have the 2-year stutter to 2015 to get us on the cycle we're at now. My guess is, and I've asked a bunch of much more qualified people than me, and nobody has an answer to this. So I've gone around to historians on the game as to why was this the case. No one can tell me. I still want to know. My guess, my hunch on it is 1945 they play the victory tests, so they're not an official test series, they're not an Ashes series, but an Australian team tours. And I reckon post World War II, you've got a sort of goodwill situation where you've had the Allied forces, the Commonwealth that's pulled together and all the rest of it, where England's cricket authorities would feel that they needed to pay respect to the different countries who'd been involved in the war by having them come and play. Yep. So India come in 46, South Africa come in 47, Australia come in 48, New Zealand come in 49, West Indies come in 1950. And New Zealand wouldn't have been, they weren't a regular part of the touring group at the time. South Africa are only just becoming a probably good team, having been pretty ropey through the 1930s. India have come through. They've got independence in 47, I think it is. So they're now a sort of team, a country in its own right with its team. And then Pakistan comes through after partition, and they've got to play. So I think it's including New Zealand and then including Pakistan means they've got to fit more teams into those summers. So they have Australia in 53, and then they've only got 3 years to the next. So they go Australia, then Pakistan 54, South Africa 55, Australia 56. So I think they're kind of going, we've got to squeeze Australia in.
They have India back in 52,
52,
right?
yeah.
So would that make sense in relation to the previous trip they made in 47? I guess it does.
So India 46, India 46, South Africa 47.
South Africa 47.
Australia 48. And then after that it goes New Zealand, West Indies, South Africa and India before Australia.
Okay.
And then they get Pakistan in there and then South Africa before Australia come back. And then they get West Indies, New Zealand, India and South Africa before Australia come in. And then again, it's a 3-year gap, Australia, Pakistan, West Indies, Australia. So it just seems like those 5-year gaps might be about having to get somebody else in there first. But then the 3-year one is, well, you want to play Australia more than the others because that's the bigger rivalry.
Oh, gosh, simpler times. Imagine we were talking about, not that I'm coveting 5 years.
Too many tourists.
Yeah. 4 years, though. It just feels right, doesn't it? I acknowledge that we get caught up sometimes in the way things are, and therefore we think it's the way it should be forever. And I'm guilty of that when it comes to some parts of the game.
Tree on the Canterbury ground.
But the idea of a 4-year rolling cycle with Australia and England just feels like the right amount of time, because it hasn't felt right when it's been sped up. Those aforementioned gaps didn't feel that felt like scarcity was thrown out the window in favour of expedience and commercial realities, really.
I'm surprised they only play 5 tests, honestly. I'm surprised they're not going, let's play 6, let's play 7.
Well, now we're talking. If I had my way. But good luck trying to litigate the case or advance the case.
I'm surprised that CA and the ECB, they'd make money out of it. If they're talking about their whole economy is based on Ash's series of 5 tests,
by the way,
they'd make more of 6 or 7.
By the way, I meant to say this to you off air, but I'm going to advance it on air.
Okay.
Thoughts rattling around in my brain, right?
Yeah.
Centenary test, sesquicentenary test, right? Good as gold, beauty.
That's
worked out okay. Would it be reasonable to assume that if we don't know about a sesquicentenary test in 2030, that it's not going to happen, right? Because what are we? It's 2025, right? No one's talking about it apart from you and me. So the probability of it happening, the return leg, what they did in 1980, right? If no one's talking about it, 5 years out, with the FTP,
they weren't talking about the 150
they were
2 years ago.
I know. I don't know about that. I guess after the sesquicentenary, no one's been gibbering about this apart from us, right? So let's park it, put it to one side. What about using 1882 as the anchor, the start of the Ashes?
150 since Spofford.
What do you reckon? And you do it at the Oval, of course. I'm quite determined. This has to be at the Oval. It's disrespectful. They played the 1980 Test at Lords, so they played Old England versus Old Australia at the Oval when the real Test match was happening across the river. What about 2032, 150 years since the Ashes one-off Test match? That's more time. That's more lead. That's more, run up. I'm not sure whether that would be an Ashes summer. I don't know. Fuck if I know. Probably not.
No, 31 would be. So you'd have a 150th in 2030. You'd have a full Ashes series in 2031, and then another 150th in 2030.
Yeah, I guess my point is I don't think they're going to do
an Olympics.
I don't think they're going to do a 2030. My instinct is that if no one's talking about this apart from you and me, then I don't think they're going to do a 2030. I'd love to be wrong. I think
they'll do it. I think we're still 5 years out, and that's enough time that there's money to be made. They will make money from putting on the test match. Like, tell me, I don't know. Tell me, like, Richard Gould's not going to turn down the opportunity to.
I should have asked him
more cash in the coffers.
I didn't ask him. I think I had it on my list of questions and just brushed over it. Maybe I'll
go and sit outside his house in your Commodore.
I'll bet you. Well, that's the car I was in when I went to the ACB those years ago with the Mark Wall dropping. That was that car too. You know what? I think we've done we've done the show. It's been a good one. 5 we got some confirmations in here too. I think I've got one here from Andrew Pellicati, who last week we did the answer that related to. Well, he sent 150, then he couldn't remember what it meant with Funky Miller, so we took his next number, which was 300, and he told me it was going to be about a milestone, and we worked out it was Nathan Lyon's 300th Test wicket. And I ended up doing the inside baseball on sandpaper. I went through exactly how I experienced those couple of days, and it came up pretty well, I reckon, given it was all kind of, I wonder how this will work without any notes, but most of it's still in my head, funnily enough. Andrew says, enjoyed the inside baseball on sandpaper and the walk through Gary's milestones. That's the other thing we did there with Norcross. Also enjoyed the rules of engagement section, which was the television episode that Daniel watched for another answer. I used to watch that Tuesday nights on Channel 10. I still have no idea what my Funky Miller pledge was for. I know it was focusing on his test career as an offie, but I can't remember how it linked to 150. I'm already thinking of my next nerd pledge, possibly Canberra Comets related. Oh, do it.
Oh, yeah.
Do it, Andrew.
Could it have been, because Trumbull was 142, right? That record that Lyon broke to be the most prolific
in the Caribbean in 2015. Yeah, I think
it was to do with Lyon getting around 150 and going past all the off spinners, including Miller.
Look, I'm already one step ahead. I want Canberra Comet stuff. I don't think we've done that properly on Storytime, and we should have by this stage of our
in the shorts. The Secret Life of Alex Mack, Katie Mack. Brendan Crabb wrote in saying Norcross had the right answer for my nerd pledge. This is about the rules of engagement thing. I happened to see that episode one night and thought it would be funny for one of you to watch it and recap it. I doubt anyone has ever dissected an episode of Rules of Engagement in such detail. And this is a confirmation that I lost down the back of the couch from a while back with Paul Reeve, whose pledge was £2 flat. The clue said 100 plus 100. Phil de Freitas Daffy was the 100th player to take 100 wickets. Paul Reeve says, confirmed. Pleased to see that my duck clue gave you a brief pause but didn't lead you astray. Daffy was in my memory as one of the new Bothams. Enjoyed where you went with the free hit and then the actual answer. I need to work on my next number now. So does everybody. Work on your next number. Send them through. We'll add them to the list and we'll get to them sometime around the sesquicentenary test of 2032.
I don't know, maybe not. What I really want is new people to join up because this is the lifeblood of the show. It takes a fair bit to commit to this week in, week out. So much so that I've had to shelve the book I was writing this year because I don't have time. And that's because the podcast is full-time, truly full-time and some. So be part of that. Be part of what we're doing. Patreon.com/thefinalword. And you can be part of our community and you can help Jeff and I do what we do 8 days a week. And you can join our Discord channel, which is a lovely thing. And you can play in Final Word cricket teams and you can read books, which is the unofficial book club thing that goes on in the channel. You can make friends for life. And also you can talk cricket in a far friendlier place than any of the social media platforms provide, which is become a lovely bonus of our Discord channel. So all of that and more. And of course, fundamentally, you can help making this program on a weekend, which requires people to continue signing up to be viable. So why not you today? Patreon.com/thefinalword to end out story time 227. All I have left to say is I hope that people have nice weekends.
That is a thing that I hope as well. We'll see you later.
Bye.